House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is set for a diplomatic trip to Asia, and an official in Taiwan welcomes the idea of her visit to the country.
我们非常感谢Pelosi 议长长年以来对于台湾。
Taiwan's premier says that his country would be pleased if the speaker visits. It would be the first time in 25 years the sitting Speaker of the House visited Taiwan. The self-governing island conducted military exercises earlier to prepare for a potential Chinese invasion. And joining us now to discuss is Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, welcome back. Always so good to be with you. Let's talk more about House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's trip to Asia. Even though her potential visit to Taiwan is unconfirmed, both China and now Russia are warning that the U.S., if they do get involved with Taiwan. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it is important for Speaker Pelosi to go to Taiwan because Beijing has made this a test of wills. But it's more than just a test of wills, Tracy, because if she doesn't go, she will be emboldening and legitimizing the worst elements in the Chinese political system by showing everybody else that threats of intimidation, they work. And once that starts, the dynamic will continue. So we have a lot on the line right now.
Yeah, and even a member of the Chinese state-affiliated media tweeted today, if U.S. fighter jets accompany Speaker Pelosi to Taiwan, China's military can shoot them down. Gordon, your reaction to this messaging?
Yeah, Hu Se-jin, who wrote this, was a former editor of the Global Times, which is a Communist Party tabloid. He has been often used by the regime to sort of put things out there to see what the reaction is. And he really has been messaging on behalf of Beijing. So we can assume that something like this is not just off the top of his head. This was well thought out. It was considered by the Chinese military and by Xi Jinping himself. So it's very clear, China's threats day by day have become more specific, and we've got to be concerned. And at this point, the Biden administration, I believe, has got to take into account that and protect the speaker's plane as she approaches Taiwan, if that's what happens.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the conversation between President Biden and President Xi the other day. Beijing is disputing that President Biden raised concerns over forced labor and genocide in the communist country. Talk to us more about that.
Well, China's committing genocide and crimes against humanity. We're talking about forced rape, forced sterilization, mass internments, torture, killing. We have an obligation under the 1948 Genocide Convention to prevent acts of genocide. And clearly, President Biden has an obligation to speak about these things when he talks to the Chinese leader. Now, I'm sure that China doesn't want that to be disclosed. And I do hope that President Biden did bring that forward, because remember, at the beginning of his administration, Biden just chalked up things like genocide to cultural differences. That was a disgusting comment at the time, and I hope that he's learned since then. But the United States needs to impose costs on China for genocide, because we know from the 1940s what happens when we allow these things to occur.
Yeah, and Gordon, I want to touch on something else. As you know, China is buying farmland here in the United States. Most alarming is some of that land in North Dakota that's actually near a military base. And meanwhile, there are also reports that the U.S. is investigating Chinese-based telecom company Huawei because of concerns that its equipment on some U.S. cell phone towers could be intercepting sensitive military information from U.S. bases. How concerning is all of this, and what does it mean for our national security?
Well, it's clear that China is using purchases of farmland and, for instance, Huawei's inclusion in telephone networks as a means of intercepting sensitive communications. You talked about North Dakota. That's the Grand Forks Air Force Base, where the U.S. maintains satellite communication links and links with drones around the world. And, all of a sudden, within 12 miles, a Chinese company wants to build a corn milling facility. Tracy, I can understand why the Chinese want to intercept communications. But remember, this is our country. We can prevent this. And we have, over the course of a decade, have just ignored this issue of China's purchases of farm and ranch land. We know they're doing all sorts of malicious activities on purchases, and yet we don't do anything. This is our country.
Absolutely. And Gordon, we have about a minute left or so. Wondering what else you have your eye on right now.
I think the most important thing is China's provocative activities apart from Taiwan. Just today, we have 4 Chinese warships in Japanese territorial waters in the Senkakus in the East China Sea. China is pressuring the Philippines at Second Thomas Shoal in the South China Sea. Chinese troops are deep into Indian-controlled territory in Ladakh and the Himalayas. This is not about Taiwan or Nancy Pelosi. This is a China that is lashing out.
And we're going to leave it right there. Gordon, thank you so much. Always appreciate your analysis.
Thank you, Tracy.